1.5 hours outside the Time Watch's area and 30 hours inside soon passed and the Time Watch's effect ended. Even though the effect of the Time Watch ended, Evan remained motionless, still refining the perfect level fire domain stone. It took him 6 more hours, in addition to the time he spent inside the Time Watch field to completely refine the domain stone. Once the domain stone was fully refined, the palm-sized stone in Evan's hand turned into dust and scattered away in the air. As the domain stone scattered away, Evan slowly opened his eyes and a delightful look flashed on his face. "Good thing I used this domain stone," he muttered in a low voice. "Because of the knowledge I gained after refining it, I can at least have the time it takes to create my domain." Evan stood up from the ground and looked at the bronze-colored Time Watch in his hands. 4 days of cooldown time, huh? He said to himself and shook his head. A cooldown time of 4 days is not long. Besides, this cooldown time will decrease even more once I evolve the Time Watch into a rank 2 artifact. He put away the Time Watch inside his shadow storage and walked towards Biscuit, who was lying on the ground with Elora sleeping on top of its back. "Come back," he sent a message to all of his shadow undeads using the shadow senses, and soon all of them returned. Once they returned, Evan sent all of them back inside the shadow storage and patted Biscuit's head, waking the lazy bird from its slumber. "Let's go, we already wasted a lot of time here," he said in a low voice and jumped on its back. Biscuit nodded its head upon hearing Evan, unfolded its giant black wings, and with a single flap, soared towards the sky, heading straight towards the central area of the first layer where the pillar of half-golden and half-black light was located. As Biscuit flew towards the pillar of light, Evan thought about creating his domain, but after a moment of deep thinking, he decided to wait until he reached the central area of the first layer. Creating a domain is a very risky task, and if I try to create it now and get interrupted by a monster in the middle of it, all of my efforts will go to waste, Evan thought aloud and looked at Elora, who was sleeping beside him. "I should wait till we reach the safe place Elora talked about before I create my domain." If Evan were in the third or second layer of the tomb, he could have chosen any place to create his domain, as his shadow undeads and Biscuit could easily handle the monsters of the third and second layers. But the first layer is different. There are many mid-level and even peak rank 3 monsters here. Even under the protection of Biscuit and his shadow undeads, these monsters can reach him and interrupt him while he creates his domain. Normally, when people fail during the process of creating their domain, most of the time, their core would be seriously damaged and they wouldn't be able to create their domain until they fully healed their core. At the same time, they wouldn't be able to use their abilities to their full potential because of the damaged core. In reality, Evan was not worried about this backlash. He was confident that due to the abnormality of his primordial monarch core, even if he failed to create his domain, his core wouldn't receive any kind of damage. However, just because his core wouldn't be damaged didn't mean he wanted to take unnecessary risks. Considering he was heading towards the center of the first layer, the chances of encountering mid or even peak level rank 3 monsters were very high. If that happened, he would have to stop creating his domain midway to deal with those monsters. Instead of wasting time trying to create a domain that he might have to stop creating midway, he decided it was better to wait until he reached the safe place Elora had mentioned when he asked her about the area around the Pillar of Light. Skill domain, huh? Evan muttered in a low voice and closed his eyes, thinking about the 3 void skills he had comprehended while transforming his world essence into the conceptual energy of void. 8 days later, "This place is really messed up," Evan said with a frown on his face as he looked at 3 mid-level rank 3 monsters that looked like black wolves in front of him. "Elora, how far is the safe place you mentioned?" Evan asked in a low voice, looking at Elora, who stood beside him. Elora pondered for a while upon hearing Evan, and after a few seconds, she said in a voice filled with certainty, "It should be around 20,000 kilometers away in that direction." Evan looked in the direction Elora was pointing and sighed upon seeing the 3 mid-level rank 3 wolves also in that direction. Although he was irritated by his situation, he didn't lose his composure, as it wasn't the first time he was facing a situation like this. During the previous 8 days, he had encountered many similar situations and successfully avoided them. Once Elora confirmed the direction of the safe location, Evan used his shadow senses to send a message. A few minutes after Evan sent the message, the ears of the 3 sleeping wolves suddenly perked up, and all 3 of them raised their heads, looking to their right. Upon looking there, The eyes of all three wolves turned cold as they saw thousands of black-colored rank 1 and rank 2 monsters, along with a large army of skeletons coming towards them. Howl, howl, howl. Seeing so many low-level monsters daring to enter their territory, all three of them howled at the same time and instantly appeared in front of the army of shadow undeads. Roar, roar. The shadow undead of the dragons, who were at the front of the army, roared madly upon seeing the wolves and charged towards them, followed by the attacks of the other shadow undeads. The mid-level rank 3 wolves just sneered when they saw the attacks, and with a flash, all three of them disappeared from their positions and appeared in the middle of the army of shadow undeads. Boom, crackle. Different kinds of attacks filled the surroundings as a large-scale fight broke out between the 3 mid-level rank 3 wolves and the shadow undeads. Evan looked at the fight from a distance, and upon seeing that the way towards the place Elora pointed out was clear, he picked up the red-haired girl in his arms and took a step forward. The moment he took a step forward, the boots he was wearing flashed with silver-white light and he disappeared from the spot using the Step of Voidgazer skill of his boots. Step of Voidgazer. When the wearer activates this skill, they gain the ability to step into the void and traverse vast distances in mere seconds, teleporting from one point to another. The maximum distance you can travel using this skill is 5,000 kilometers, and this skill can be used 4 times a day. Using the Step of Voidgazer, Evan appeared 5,000 kilometers away in an instant, but he didn't stop there and used the ability of the boots 3 more times. Because the wolves were busy fighting against his shadow undeads, they were not able to sense him, and Evan successfully appeared 20,000 kilometers away. "Father, look over there. That's the place I was talking about," Elora suddenly said in an excited voice, pointing in front of them. Evan looked in the direction Elora was pointing and saw a small cave at the bottom of a mountain. "Are you talking about that cave?" he asked upon noticing the cave. "Yes." Hearing the positive response from Elora, Evan didn't waste any time and instantly rushed towards the cave. The cave was not far away, so he reached it in less than a minute. Once he stopped in front of the cave, he noticed its entrance was covered by a golden-colored barrier, blocking his way. Evan wanted to ask Elora about the barrier, but before he could, the red-haired girl jumped down from his arms and pulled him towards the cave entrance, passing through the golden-colored barrier along with him without any problem. Upon entering the cave, Evan was quite surprised because he found its interior was actually quite impressive. The floor of the cave was made of polished black stone, shining like a mirror. The walls of the cave were engraved with various intricate designs, giving it an ancient look. In the middle of the cave, there was a simple bed with a clean, comfortable-looking white futon on top of it. "This cave, it looks like someone's home," Evan thought inwardly as he looked at Elora, who had already slumped down on the bed. "Elora, does someone live here?" Even though Evan already had an idea about the identity of the person who lived here, he still asked the red-haired girl to confirm his guess. Hearing Evan, Elora raised her head slightly from the bed and said in a proud tone, "I am the one who lives here, father." "So it's really her, huh?" Evan wasn't shocked when he heard Elora's response, as he had already guessed it when he saw her slumping down on the bed as if she owned the place. Although he wasn't shocked, he was still surprised and couldn't help but ask, "If you live here, then how did you appear near that lake?" "I was sleeping when I suddenly felt your presence around 2 months ago, so I went out to look for you," Elora replied while rolling on the bed. "More than 2 months ago?" Evan raised an eyebrow in surprise upon hearing her. "Does it mean she sensed my presence the moment I entered the tomb?" It wouldn't be wrong to say Evan was stupefied upon hearing Elora. Although the tomb of the ancient is not as big as Utopia, it is still quite large. The distance between the first layer and the third layer, where he first appeared upon entering the tomb, is hundreds of millions of kilometers, yet Elora was saying she sensed his presence from such a distance. Could it be because of the connection I felt with her? Evan thought to himself, but he wasn't sure about his guess. Instead of the connection he felt with her during their first meeting, he suspected the reason she was able to sense his presence was somehow related to the pillar of half-golden and half-black light. Forget it. Instead of thinking about this, I should focus on creating my domain first so that I can move towards the Pillar of Light. Speaking of the Pillar of Light, Evan couldn't help but think about the things he had seen in the last 8 days and felt a massive headache. "There are too many monsters here," he said inwardly, feeling that even if he created his domain, it would not be easy for him to face all of those monsters. Other than mid-level ones, I even noticed 4 peak rank 3 monsters, and if I want to reach the Light Pillar, I will have to cross paths with at least one of them. Evan looked at Elora, who was lying on the bed, and after a moment of hesitation, he asked her, "Alora, can you defeat a peak rank 3 monster?" Honestly, Evan didn't want to let her fight against the monsters. He didn't know why, but he always felt uneasy in his heart whenever he thought about letting her fight against them. He wasn't sure if it was because he was worried about her or if he didn't want to see her fight against the monsters, but there was always a feeling in his heart urging him not to let her engage in combat. This was why even while coming here, he never asked her to fight against the monsters. But in his current situation, Evan had no other choice. He had already spent 8 days getting here and now had a little over 10 days left before the Tomb of the Ancient closed. If he wanted to reach the Pillar of Light before the tomb closed, he had no choice but to ask Alora to fight against the peak rank 3 monsters. When Alora heard Evan's question, asking if she could defeat a rank 3 monster, she immediately stood up from the bed and said in a proud voice, "Of course, I can defeat it." Evan looked at Alora's confidence-filled face for a few seconds and sighed inwardly. "I hope the uneasy feeling that I have in my heart is just a mere illusion," he thought to himself and walked toward Alora. "Good, rest for a while. We will soon move towards the Pillar of Light," he said while patting her head before sitting down on the ground. After sitting down, Evan didn't start creating his domain immediately. Instead, he called out Octavius. "Old man." Hearing Evan's voice, Octavius appeared in front of him and asked calmly, "Do you need something?" Evan nodded his head upon hearing Octavius and took out a rainbow-colored fruit from his shadow storage. Seeing the fruit in Evan's hand, Octavius raised an eyebrow in surprise, but when he realized what kind of fruit it was, something clicked in his mind and his eyes opened wide. "Don't tell me you want to," he said in a shocked voice, looking at the rainbow-colored fruit in Evan's hand with a stunned expression on his face. Seeing Octavius' shocked look, Evan smirked and threw the fruit towards him. The old man caught the fruit Evan threw towards him and opened his mouth to say something, but looking at the fruit in his hands, he wasn't able to say anything. "I want you to refine this fruit into a breaker pill," Evan said with a smug smile on his face. "I am going to become a Fu King rank 2 core evolver in one go." The domain breaker fruit. A fruit filled with a large amount of world essence and containing a small portion of world law. Eating this fruit can help a person evolve their domain into a zone. Using the domain breaker fruit, you can refine the breaker pill, which can increase the chances of evolving your domain into zone by another 30%. Evan got this fruit in chap 661. You can check if you want, hehe, not by author. Are you sure about this? You should know that your core will be in an unstable state once you finish creating your domain. If you try to evolve your domain into a zone while your core is unstable, there is a very high chance you will fail and your core will be seriously damaged, Octavius said in a serious voice as he held the domain breaker fruit in his hands. "Don't worry about it, I know what I am doing," Evan said dismissively upon hearing Octavius and waved his hand. He took out a storage ring from his shadow storage and handed it to him. "All the herbs that I collected inside the tomb are inside this ring. See if there are any herbs that you need to create the breaker pill." Octavius looked at Evan for a few seconds and upon seeing he was serious, he shook his head and didn't say anything. He looked inside the storage ring and, after a few minutes, he took out 7 herbs from inside the ring. "These herbs can increase the effect of the breaker pill," Octavius said after taking out the herbs and placing them with the domain breaker fruit. Evan nodded, hearing Octavius, and handed him the alchemy cauldron and a storage ring filled with essence stones. "How long will it take you to make the breaker pill?" "You can use as many essence stones as you want to increase the refining speed. It's not difficult to make a breaker pill. I should be able to finish it in a few hours." Evan sighed in relief upon hearing Octavius, as he was afraid that it would take a few days to create the breaker pill, just like how it took Octavius a few days to create the Beast Heart draft that increased his rank from mid-level rank 1 to peak rank 1. "Alora, no one can enter the cave without your permission, right?" Evan asked Alora, who was lying on the bed. Octavius would use the energy of millions of essence stones to refine the breaker pill. The energy released by millions of high-level essence stones would surely attract the attention of the monsters. Although Alora had already told him this place was completely safe, he still wanted to confirm it again. "Don't worry, father. The barrier won't allow anyone to enter without my permission," Alora said in a confident voice upon hearing Evan. "Good." Evan nodded his head hearing Alora and looked back at Octavius. "You can start refining the pill. There are 50 million high-level essence stones inside the ring. Is it enough, or do you need more?" 50 million essence stones are more than enough," Octavius said in a light voice, and with a wave of his hand, a small mountain of essence stones came out of the ring. The old man sat down on top of the essence stone mountain, and the energy of the stones started to flow inside his soul body. Seeing Octavius start to refine the breaker pill, Evan also didn't wait any longer and took out the time watch from his shadow storage. The cooldown time of the time watch had already ended 4 days ago, but Evan didn't get a chance to use it while coming towards the center of the first layer because of the monsters, so he was planning to use it now. After taking out the time watch, he activated it, and a field with a time ratio of 120 covered an area of 20 meters around him. The time watch will stay active for 5 hours, which is a little over 4 days inside the time field. Evan thought inwardly and closed his eyes. I need to create a domain and evolve it into a zone before the effect of the time watch ends. After closing his eyes, Evan focused on the conceptual energy of the void inside his primordial monarch core and slowly extracted it, gathering it right beside his diamond-shaped fingernail-sized primordial monarch core. Extracting the void energy from his core wasn't a difficult task, and in just a few minutes, all of his void energy was floating right beside his primordial monarch core. Now comes the annoying part. After extracting all the void energy, Evan took a deep breath and his spiritual power surged, moving towards the mass of void energy floating beside his core. He covered the mass of void energy with his spiritual power and tried to mold it into the shape of a ring. Evan's spiritual power was just a step away from reaching mid-level rank 2, but even then, molding the mass of void energy into the shape of a ring wasn't easy because of its chaotic nature. It took Evan around 1.5 hours to mold the mass of void energy into the shape of a ring, but even then, the chaotic nature of the void energy was still acting up, and the void energy ring was fluctuating violently as if its ring shape would collapse at any moment. Evan used his spiritual power to its limit and tried to hold the void energy in the shape of a ring. At the same time, using his spiritual power, he compressed the palm-sized void ring, trying to reduce its size. As Evan reduced the size of the ring and compressed the void energy, its chaotic nature started to stabilize. Using his spiritual power, Evan continued to compress the void energy ring, and around 15 hours later, the palm-sized void energy ring was just a little bigger than his diamond-shaped, fingernail-sized primordial monarch core. The small void energy ring was dark purple in color and was slowly spinning right beside his core. Now the most difficult part. Evan muttered in a low voice as he took out a spiritual energy recovery potion from his shadow storage and drank it in one go, trying to recover the spiritual power he had spent while compressing the void energy ring. After drinking the potion, the spiritual power he had spent in the last few hours slowly started to recover. At the same time, Evan moved the small void energy ring toward his core, planning to integrate it with the void skill he had chosen to create his skill domain. The first void skill Evan had comprehended was the void break. Using this skill, he can break the space barrier and open a void rift that he can use to defend against an attack or enter the void space through it. Although this skill was good and could be used in many ways, he wasn't planning to use it to create his skill domain. The reason for this was that it was one of the most basic skills of void energy. Being able to open a void rift that led to the void space is not particularly special. Even if he hadn't comprehended the void break skill in the past, he was sure that once his understanding of void energy reached the 30% mark, he would be able to open the void rift solely based on his understanding of void energy. Using the void break skill to create his skill domain is definitely not the best option, as his other void skills are far better than this. His second void skill, void senses, is very simple when compared to his other void skills. Using this skill, he can send his spiritual senses inside the void space. At first glance, this skill doesn't look anything special because other than being able to send his spiritual senses inside the void, he can't use it for anything else. But unlike his other two void skills, the void senses skill has something that makes it one of the rarest skills, the ability to use void energy through spiritual senses. While using the void break or void sealing skills, Evan doesn't need anything else other than void energy itself, but unlike these two skills, in order to use the void senses skill, he needs to use his spiritual power along with void energy. The application of the void senses skill is to merge his void energy with his spiritual power and use that void energy through his spiritual power. If Evan uses the void senses skill to create his skill domain, there is a very high probability that he will be able to use his void energy in different ways through his spiritual senses. Compared to the void break skill, which is a very common skill that can be used through void energy, the appeal of the Void Senses skill, which allows its user to use void energy through spiritual power, is far higher. Similar to the Void Senses skill, his third Void skill, Void Sealing, is also very rare. Its sealing power is no joke, and the fact that Evan was successfully able to seal Momon's and Walter's power for a few seconds inside Octavius' dimension is proof of it. But in reality, even if Evan wanted to use this skill to create his skill domain, he couldn't do it. The reason for this was his imperfect control over the skill. Upon using the Void Sealing skill, it not only seals the powers of his opponents but his own powers as well. If he used this skill to create his skill domain, he was afraid that he would create a domain that would seal his own power upon activation. Moreover, the allure of using void energy through his spiritual senses was quite attractive to Evan. So even if his Void Sealing skill were perfect, he might not have chosen it. Besides the application of using void energy through spiritual senses, another reason he was inclined towards the Void Senses skill was because of his high level of spiritual power. His spiritual power was already at the limit of a beginner-level Rank 2 Core Evolver, almost comparable to a newly promoted mid-level Rank 2 Core Evolver. Since his strongest point was his spiritual power, it was obvious that he wanted to create a domain that would be able to utilize this aspect perfectly. This is why, after considering everything, Evan chose to use the Void Senses skill to create his skill domain. The small ring of void energy was gently spinning beside his primordial monarch core. After deciding which skill he wanted to use, Evan brought the void energy ring towards his core. As the void energy was part of his primordial monarch core to begin with, his core tried to absorb the energy of the void ring when he brought it near the core. However, Evan used his spiritual power to prevent the void ring from being absorbed by the core and placed it above his core. The moment he placed the void ring above his core, the void ring moved on its own and covered his diamond-shaped core like an asteroid belt, slowly spinning around it. Evan sighed in relief upon seeing this and his expression turned serious. His spiritual power entered the slowly spinning energy ring, and small strands of void energy emerged from it, connecting themselves with his primordial monarch core. As the strands of energy connected to his core also started to spin along with the void energy ring. Seeing the slowly spinning core, Evan's spiritual power surged with all its might, and he began pouring it into the void energy ring. At the same time, he focused deeply on the Void Senses skill, using his spiritual power as a bridge to infuse his understanding of the Void Senses skill into the slowly spinning void energy ring. The moment Evan's spiritual power, infused with the understanding of the Void Senses skill, came into contact with the void energy ring, the ring trembled violently and became unstable. Evan tried to stabilize it using his control over the void energy ring, but even then, most of the energy strands connecting the ring to his primordial monarch core shattered and the void energy ring became unstable, seemingly on the verge of collapse. Evan used all his spiritual power without holding back and, after a minute, he barely stabilized it. As expected, integrating a skill to create a domain is not easy. Evan thought with furrowed eyebrows and tried once again. Unfortunately, just like before, the void energy ring became unstable again, and he failed. Evan had already expected that it wouldn't be easy to integrate a rare skill like Void Senses, so he wasn't discouraged and continued to try. 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 10 times. Time continued to pass, and Evan failed to integrate the skill even after his 11th try. If it weren't for the abnormality of his primordial monarch core, his core would have been damaged long ago due to failing so many times. No matter what, I am going to succeed this time, Evan said inwardly as sweat covered his entire body. His spiritual power, infused with his understanding of the Void Senses skill, once again entered the void energy ring. Just like before, the void energy ring trembled violently, but Evan's spiritual power quickly moved to stabilize the ring before it could cause any problems. Under the precise control of his spiritual power, the void energy ring slowly stabilized and he continued to pour his spiritual energy into the ring. Inside the field created by the time watch, it had already been 2 days since Evan started to create his domain. Octavius had successfully refined the breaker pill long ago and was waiting for Evan to finish creating his domain. As he waited for Evan, he suddenly felt some strange energy fluctuations filling the cave. Feeling the energy fluctuations, the old man raised an eyebrow and looked at their source, only to see a small dark purple field emanating from Evan's body, covering an area of around 2 meters around him. Octavius didn't know why, but when he looked at the small dark purple field, his soul body trembled and he felt an instinctive fear towards it, as if his soul body would be in serious danger if he touched the dark purple field. What kind of domain is he creating? Octavius thought inwardly, feeling perplexed that he was feeling danger due to the purple field around Evan, even though he didn't have a physical body. Swish! Just when Octavius was wondering what kind of domain Evan was creating, the small dark purple field around Evan started to expand. Seeing the dark purple field was moving towards him, Octavius panicked and quickly hid inside the rank 3 alchemy cauldron, closing its lid to completely isolate himself from Evan's domain that started to take shape. The small void energy ring, connected to Evan's primordial monarch core through energy threads, was rapidly spinning, channeling the void energy inside his core in a rhythmic cycle. As the void energy traveled between the core and the ring, the dark purple energy field emitting from Evan's body continued to expand, covering the entire layout of the cave. Even after covering the entire cave, the dark purple energy field wanted to expand even more, but the walls of the cave seemed to be made of special materials, and even with the potent void energy, the energy field wasn't able to pierce the walls and expand further. As Evan's domain wasn't able to expand further, its power began to concentrate, releasing terrifying spiritual pressure inside the cave. Octavius, who had hidden himself inside the rank 3 cauldron, felt his soul body tremble in fear upon feeling the terrifying spiritual pressure of Evan's domain. He did not know what kind of domain Evan was creating, but feeling the spiritual pressure, he was certain that this domain would be very effective against souls. I can't even use my spiritual senses to probe this domain. Octavius' current spiritual power was comparable to that of a peak rank 1 core evolver. Even though it wasn't very high, it wasn't low either. But when he tried to send his spiritual senses outside of the cauldron to probe Evan's domain, he felt as if instead of the cave, he had sent his spiritual senses into an empty void where he couldn't sense anything. Although he was not 100% sure, he felt that even if his spiritual power reached mid-level rank 2, he would not be able to probe Evan's domain. It seems he somehow managed to create a domain that allows him to utilize the void energy through his spiritual power. As a former rank 5 core evolver, it wasn't difficult for Octavius to understand what was happening. But as he thought about the powerful spiritual pressure, he suddenly remembered Elora, who was still outside, and his expression changed. Damn, I hope she is fine, otherwise, I can't imagine what that monster would do. Inside the cave, Elora was looking at the dark purple field around her with a curious look on her face. Even though the field was releasing terrifying spiritual power fluctuations that seemed to want to devour the souls of everyone who came into contact with them, Elora didn't show any reaction and comfortably sat on the bed, looking at Evan. Inside Evan's body, the void energy was traveling faster and faster between his core and the energy ring, forming a new channel for his void energy. Before, his void energy was stored inside his core, but now, all of his void energy was condensed into the void energy ring. Now Evan only needed to perfect this new energy channel, and once he perfected it, he would be able to use his domain just by channeling the void energy inside his core through this new energy pathway. About 3 hours later, the void energy threads that connected the energy ring with his core started to solidify, and the void energy was flowing through them without any obstruction. In the inner area of Evan's heart, the fingernail-sized, diamond-shaped primordial monarch core was slowly spinning like a planet, surrounded by the void energy ring that looked like an asteroid belt. Almost there, Evan thought inwardly as he strengthened the energy strands connected to the core using his spiritual power. Just when Evan thought everything would be over in 2 or 3 hours, the rune of origin that covered his heart lit up. Your origin essence is reacting to your domain. Your domain is evolving under the influence of your origin essence. 2 notifications flashed before Evan's eyes, startling him. He was still confused when a powerful energy erupted from the outline of the rune of origin that covered his heart, moving straight towards his primordial monarch core and void energy ring. Evan was taken aback because of the sudden change and wasn't able to react in time. The energy sent by the rune of origin was absorbed by his core, traveling through the newly created channel between his core and the energy ring. As the energy moved between his core and the void energy ring, Evan felt the energy released by the rune of origin was trying to change something fundamental about his domain. Although he didn't know what the energy was trying to change, he could feel that it was of great benefit to him. Noticing the energy was not doing anything harmful, Evan did not interrupt and allowed it to change his domain. In less than 5 seconds, the energy traveled back and forth between his core and the void ring over 100 times. As the energy moved through the newly created pathways, these pathways became even firmer, strengthening themselves with the energy released by the rune of origin. Evan was surprised by the changes in the energy pathways and noticed the void energy was now flowing even more smoothly. But halfway through, Evan suddenly noticed something and a deep frown appeared on his face. "What's going on?" he said inwardly as he looked at the Rune of Origin, which was slowly losing its shine and returning to its previous dormant state. In less than 5 seconds, the Rune of Origin, which had been shining brightly, returned to normal and the energy released by it also disappeared. Evan was confused by the sudden disappearance of the energy because he could tell that it hadn't changed anything about his domain. Just when Evan was wondering what was going on, some notifications flashed in front of his eyes. The evolution of your domain has failed due to a low amount of origin essence. Increase your authority as the holder of origin to amplify the amount of origin essence within your possession. The evolution of your domain will continue once you have a sufficient amount of origin essence. Inside the cave, Evan slowly opened his eyes. For a split second, his deep black eyes flashed with dark purple void energy before they returned to normal. Although the energy released by the Rune of Origin wasn't able to evolve his domain, it still solidified the energy pathways between the energy ring and his core, saving him a few hours of effort. Increase my authority as an origin holder, huh? Evan muttered in a low voice, looking at the notifications he received earlier. He still remembered that when the syncretization between his race and the origin universe increased, he received a notification telling him that his position as the holder of origin had further solidified. Do I need to increase the syncretization rate to increase my authority? Evan muttered in a low voice, confused because he did not know anything about what this holder of origin thing was. Are you done? Just when Evan was immersed in his thoughts, he heard Octavius' frightful voice and saw the old man looking at him with eyes full of resentment. Evan was confused seeing the way the old man was looking at him, but when he looked around and saw the condition of the cave, he finally understood what happened. Was it caused by my domain? He asked after a moment of silence, looking at the walls of the cave that were lightly damaged. Evan was quite surprised upon seeing the damaged walls because although he wasn't sure what kind of material the cave walls were made of, he had inspected them before he started to create his domain, so he knew just how durable they were. On top of that, he could see that the rank 3 alchemy cauldron he had given to Octavius was filled with cracks, seemingly on the verge of collapse. Seeing the damage around him, he quickly looked behind him, and seeing Elora was sleeping on the bed without any injuries, he sighed in relief. When Octavius heard Evan's question, his eyes twitched uncontrollably. Do you see anyone else here other than you who can cause such damage? Evan didn't reply to Octavius' question and instead marveled at the power of his domain. But after a few seconds, he felt something was not right as it was impossible for his newly created domain to cause such damage. He wasn't underestimating the power of his domain, but it was simply impossible for it to nearly destroy a rank 3 cauldron which was made of special materials to hold the refining process of high-level pills and herbs. Something is definitely wrong here, Evan thought to himself and looked at Octavius with a serious look. Can you tell me what happened? Octavius was taken aback when he saw Evan's serious look, but noticing he was thinking about something, he didn't hide anything and told everything that happened earlier. As Evan listened to Octavius, he wasn't surprised to hear about the spiritual pressure of his domain as he already knew about its functions. It can be said that although not much, Evan still received great insight into using his void energy through his spiritual senses upon the completion of his domain. Now he just needed to experiment a bit, and he would be able to use his void energy in many different ways. The first part of the explanation about the absurd spiritual power of his domain didn't affect him, but when Evan heard the last part, his expression finally changed. So you mean to say all of this damage was caused by my domain in the last few seconds before I reseeded it? He asked with furrowed eyebrows. Yes, although your domain was powerful from the moment it started to take shape, it was not strong enough to affect the cave walls or the cauldron. But during the last few seconds, the power of your domain suddenly surged and it started to affect the walls and cauldron as well. A sudden power amplification, it must be related to the energy that the Rune of Origin released, Evan thought inwardly and activated his domain. As he used his domain, his void energy started to move through the newly formed pathways between his core and the void energy ring, and a dark purple energy field came out of his body, covering the entire cave. Octavius was caught inside Evan's domain, but he didn't panic like before as he knew the current domain was fully under Evan's control and wouldn't harm him. Once the domain covered the entire cave, Octavius raised an eyebrow in surprise. Its power is lower than before, he said, noticing the domain wasn't able to damage the cave walls or the rank 3 cauldron that was already on the verge of collapse. As expected, it seems the sudden increase in power was really related to the energy released by the Rune of Origin, Evan thought to himself as his eyes flashed with a thoughtful look. I wonder what kind of changes my domain would have gone through if the energy released by the Rune of Origin had successfully evolved it, Evan thought and sighed inwardly, feeling pity that his domain didn't evolve. But he didn't continue to dwell on this matter as there was still something that he needed to do. He looked at the time watch in his hands and noticed it would stay active for 2 more hours, leaving him with 40 hours to finish what he wanted to do. Is it ready? He asked Octavius after looking at the remaining time. Octavius nodded upon hearing Evan and gave him a pill bottle. Evan looked inside the bottle and saw a rainbow-colored pill. Do you think you will succeed? Octavius suddenly asked, feeling unsure because he had never heard of anyone who evolved their domain into a zone just after its creation. Evan smiled upon hearing Octavius but didn't say anything. Seeing Evan wasn't saying anything, Octavius shook his head and didn't ask further. Evan placed the breaker pill beside him and drank a recovery potion, trying to return to his peak condition before he took the pill. While Evan was preparing to evolve his domain, unknown to him, 2 rank 6 enemies were coming towards the first layer of the tomb. A few days ago, a deep purple portal opened in the outermost area of the 3rd layer, and a dignified-looking middle-aged man with violet eyes and black hair walked out of it. Behind the man, a tall, red-skinned demon with 2 horns on top of his head followed, emerging from the portal as well. The man and demon were obviously Eldar and Bamet, who had just entered the tomb of the ancients through the void space. The moment both of them passed through the portal and stepped inside the tomb, they felt the rejection of the tomb's laws as if the tomb wanted to expel them. Feeling the rejection, Baphomet and Eldar were not surprised as they had already expected it. Both of them quickly used their concealment skills to their limits and soon the rejection they were feeling faded away. We can hide our presence, but the moment we use our powers, we will be discovered and the tomb will try to expel us, Eldar said in a light voice as he looked at their surroundings, finding they were in a desolate land with no sign of greenery. I don't think it will be a problem. Even if we can't use most of our skills, our physical bodies are still strong enough to kill even a peak rank 3 monster with just a flick of our fingers. Besides, Baphomet said, his red eyes flashing sharply, it's not like we can't resist the laws of the tomb with our powers. Eldar rolled his eyes upon hearing Baphomet, but he did not refute him because he knew Baphomet was right and it wasn't difficult for them to resist the laws of the tomb. But even though they could resist the laws of the tomb, Eldar still reminded Baphomet in a serious voice. Even if we can resist the laws of the tomb, it's very likely that the entrance portal of the tomb will collapse due to our resistance, and we might lose this golden opportunity. So don't try to do anything foolish unless necessary. At first, Baphomet didn't understand what Eldar was trying to say, but when he thought about the restrictions placed on the tomb's portal, he quickly understood what he meant. Only people who are below rank 3 can pass through the entrance portal and enter the tomb. Anyone who is above rank 2 can't enter the tomb because of the restrictions placed on its entrance portal. Most of the core evolvers can't break these restrictions, but there are still some powerful rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers who can break these restrictions and enter the tomb through the portal. But the reason these people never broke the restrictions placed on the portal was that the moment they broke the restrictions, there was a very high chance that the portal of the tomb would collapse along with the entire dimension. Instead of using the portal, Eldar and Baphomet entered the tomb through the void space, without breaking the restrictions placed on the portal. But if they were to get discovered and resist the laws of the tomb, the restrictions placed on the tomb's portal would most likely get triggered, resulting in the destruction of the portal along with the entire dimension. Baphomet was not a fool, and he also knew the value of the tomb. Although there were not many things inside the tomb that could help him personally, it was completely different for his army. You don't need to say the obvious thing. I also don't want to destroy the tomb for no reason, Baphomet said in a flat voice as he looked at the barren land around them. He glanced at the sky and seeing the sun shining brightly above his head, he immediately understood where they were. So we are in the 3rd layer of the tomb. Eldar had noticed the blazing sun long ago. Even though they were not using their spiritual senses, they could still sense the area of a few thousand kilometers around them, and noticing that the strongest monsters around them were just mid-level rank 2 confirmed their guess that they were in the 3rd layer. Let's head to the 2nd layer first. In the video, the sky was dark and gloomy, indicating that the incident happened in the 2nd layer of the tomb. Baphomet nodded his head upon hearing Eldracar as he was thinking the same. He also wanted to know what happened a few days ago and how Zorda and the other demons had died. Although both of them had entered the tomb for the first time, it was not like they did not have any information about it. Using the information they had, they soon confirmed the direction of the second layer and moved forward. Eldracar and Baphomet were just using their physical powers to move, but even then, their speed was not slow at all. While moving towards the second layer, both of them felt the auras of many core evolvers who had entered the tomb and were still in the third layer, but Eldracar and Baphomet completely ignored them and continued to move. There were mainly two reasons for Baphomet and Eldracar to ignore these core evolvers. First of all, these core evolvers were still in the third layer, which means they wouldn't know too much about the incident that happened in the second layer. The second reason was that they didn't want to reveal the fact that they had entered the tomb. Although Eldracar and Baphomet were not afraid of anyone, both of them knew that this information would surely cause a lot of chaos in Utopia if revealed. This is why they decided to avoid these people, as both of them knew that if they appeared in front of them, these people would definitely inform their respective factions about them after leaving the tomb. Upon entering the tomb, Eldracar and Baphomet had appeared in the outermost area of the third layer, and although the third layer was not as big as the first and second layers, it still took both of them one whole day to reach the second layer despite their extremely high speed. It seems that incident really happened in the second layer, Baphomet said with a sharp look in his eyes upon seeing the gloomy sky of the second layer. Eldracar nodded his head upon hearing Baphomet. Let's find my son Voidskar. He should know everything that happened that day, the Void Dragon said, and both of them once again moved. The second layer was far bigger than the first layer, and finding Voidskar was not an easy task. While looking for him, Baphomet and Eldracar saw many other core evolvers, but since they did not want to reveal that they had entered the tomb, they ignored them. 5 days after they started their search, Baphomet and Eldracar reached the inner area of the second layer and finally saw Voidskar. Fu K, I want to get out of here and tell father about that monster as soon as possible, a man with short black hair, green eyes, and hands covered in purple dragon scales thought inwardly as he moved into the deeper area of the second layer of the tomb. If the records of Red are correct and those black undead he summoned are really shadow undeads, then that guy is. Voidskar said to himself and became restless, thinking that if his guess was correct then many things would change in Utopia. After escaping, or rather, being punched out of the shadow world, Voidskar was seriously injured. Although Evan only attacked him during the last second, his attacks were so powerful that most of Voidskar's internal organs were heavily damaged, and even after using a high-level rank 3 healing potion, it took him 5 days to fully recover. Once he recovered, he found that other than 5 or 6 people, most of the core evolvers who confronted Evan were dead, including 50 of his dragon subordinates. After the event, most of the top core evolvers like Voidskar, Blaze, Amber, Noel, Walter and others gathered to discuss what happened that day. Although Walter, the leader of the elves, didn't take part in the fight nor did he was there during the incident as had left the scene before the fight between Evan and the others broke out, he also took part in the discussion because many elves were killed by Evan during the fight. After discussing everything that happened, all of them reached the same conclusion: Evan was somehow related to the Shadow Monarch, as all of them had read about the Shadow Undeads and his absurd power level. During the fight, Evan wasn't using a disguise and appeared in front of them in his original appearance, so they also found that Evan was the same person whom Bloodmoon Auction House had placed a bounty on. After discussing among themselves, Noel and the others decided to stay away from him and inform their respective factions about him after leaving the tomb. Obviously, most of them were afraid of Evan and thought that before the tomb closed, he would come to find them and finish them off. Although they were afraid and wanted to stay together for the rest of the time until the tomb closed so that they could help each other if they accidentally met him, they were not able to say it out loud due to their pride and arrogance. Whether it was Voidskar or any other person who took part in the discussion, all of them were among the top-level core evolvers who entered the tomb, and none of them openly wanted to admit that they were afraid and wanted to team up with another person. As a result, after the discussion, most of them went their own way. Some people like Archibald, who was the leader of the dwarfs, left the second layer and returned to the third layer since he didn't want to meet the monster who killed Maximilian, the leader of the Mechadroids. Voidskar was also planning to quietly stay in the outer area of the second layer to avoid Evan, but after a few days, he heard that someone saw Evan going towards the first layer along with his rank 3 pet. After Confirming that this information was indeed correct, and Evan went to the first layer, Voidscar didn't stay in the outer area of the second layer and ventured deeper, deciding to explore the deeper area of the second layer. Although it had been more than a month since the incident and Voidscar wasn't as afraid as he was before, he still wanted to leave the tomb as soon as possible and inform Eldracar about it, as he was fully aware of the significance of this news. Someone related to the Shadow Monarch, or Voidscar thought inwardly and considered another possibility, but the moment this possibility came into his mind, he quickly shook his head. There's no way they are the same person. According to records, the Shadow Monarch was even stronger than my father, but this guy. Voidscar said and took a deep breath. He's just a rank 1 core evolver. It's absolutely impossible that they are the same person. What is absolutely impossible? Just when Voidscar was lost in his thoughts, he heard a familiar voice from behind him and was taken aback. Father. Voidscar turned around and saw Eldracar and Baphomet standing not far away from him. How did you? Voidscar showed a shocked expression upon seeing Eldracar and Baphomet, as he couldn't understand how they had entered the tomb. But although he was shocked, it didn't take him long to compose himself, and he quickly bowed his head respectfully towards them. If Eldracar was alone, he wouldn't have cared about these formalities, but since he was with Baphomet, who was the current emperor of the demons, it was necessary for Voidscar to show basic respect. Eldracar nodded his head towards Voidscar and looked at his son silently. Although he had just arrived and hadn't even spoken to him, just from a single glance, he could tell that Voidscar's mental state wasn't stable and he was stressed. Moreover, Voidscar hadn't even sensed their presence until Eldracar called out to him, which showed just how distracted his mind was. So, what were you thinking so deeply that you weren't even paying attention to your surroundings? If instead of us it had been a monster, you would have been seriously injured by it. Although there weren't any mid-level or peak-level rank 3 monsters in the second layer, there were still some beginner-level rank 3 monsters. Even though Voidscar was powerful, Eldracar knew that his son wouldn't come out unscathed if a beginner-level rank 3 monster suddenly ambushed him. Hearing Eldracar's question, Voidscar's expression changed and he quickly thought about the things that happened in the tomb. I don't know how father entered the tomb, but it doesn't matter anymore. He thought to himself, and without hiding anything, told everything about Evan to Eldracar. Voidscar told Eldracar and Baphomet everything that had happened around a month and a half ago. When he finished speaking, the eyes of Baphomet and Eldracar were wide open. The rank 6 dragon and the demon looked at each other, and both could see the shock in each other's eyes. A rank 1 core evolver killed hundreds of rank 2 core evolvers from different races, including 2 rank 3 monsters. Are you kidding us? Both of them were among the top powerhouses of Utopia and knew that even for them, it would have been impossible to kill hundreds of rank 2 core evolvers along with rank 3 monsters when they were rank 1 core evolvers. For a second, both of them thought Voidscar was fooling them, but they knew he had no reason to lie. Although Eldracar and Baphomet were shocked, both of them were still the rulers of their races, so it didn't take them more than 3 seconds to come out of their shocked state and regain their composure. Do you have his photo? Eldracar asked with a serious look on his face. Voidscar nodded his head upon hearing Eldracar and took out a crystal from his storage ring. When he activated the crystal, it showed a holographic image of Evan that the Blood Moon auction had released when they announced the bounty on his head. Upon seeing the image, Baphomet's reaction was quite tame and he just looked at it with narrowed eyes. But unlike Baphomet, when Eldracar saw the image, his pupils shrank and his face lost all its color. Seeing Eldracar's abnormal reaction, Voidscar and Baphomet were taken aback. What's wrong? Baphomet asked with a frown on his face. Eldracar didn't answer Baphomet's question and just looked at the holographic image with a lost look on his face. Some memories from a few thousand years ago resurfaced inside his mind, and the more he thought about it, the uglier his face became. Seeing Eldracar's expressions getting worse with each passing second, Baphomet suddenly thought of something and looked at the holographic image once again. Don't tell me this guy is. Baphomet said inwardly, and the way he looked at the image changed. Unlike me, who never saw the Shadow Monarch in person, Eldracar had met him many times and even had conflicts with him. From his expression, it seems like the person in this holographic image looks like the Shadow Monarch himself. When Voidscar told Baphomet and Eldracar about Evan, neither of them thought that the person in question was the Shadow Monarch himself. Eldracar thought that Evan might be someone who had skills similar to the Shadow Monarch, but the thought of him being the same person never crossed his mind. After all, he knew the Shadow Monarch too well and was aware of his power level. It was impossible for him to think that the same person somehow became a rank 1 core evolver. As for Baphomet, upon hearing Voidskar, he immediately thought about the person who destroyed his essence clone in the lower world. According to Voidskar, the rank of the person who caused the incident was not very high, indicating that he might have just arrived in Utopia using the Tower of Ascension not long ago. Although the image Voidskar showed him was quite different from the person he saw in his essence clone's memory, he didn't think too much about it, assuming his appearance might have changed because of the evolution of his core after becoming a rank 1 core evolver. But looking at Eldrakar's expression, who looked as if he had seen a ghost, Baphomet was no longer sure about his guess. In his eyes, although the person who destroyed his essence clone had many similarities to the Shadow Monarch, he didn't consider the possibility of the two being the same person. But if the person in the image really looked like the Shadow Monarch, then things were completely different. Stop spacing out. Baphomet lightly slapped Eldrakar's back, bringing him back to his senses. Huh, Eldrakar was startled by the sudden slap and looked at Baphomet with a blank expression. Baphomet didn't care about Eldrakar's blank look and asked in a serious voice, "You know this person?" Eldrakar showed a complicated expression upon hearing Baphomet and said in a low voice, "His appearance is very similar to that bastard." As I thought. Baphomet narrowed his eyes upon hearing Eldrakar and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. "Do you think they are the same person?" he asked after a moment. "Impossible." Eldrakar denied it without any hesitation. "I don't know why he looks similar to him or why he can summon the shadow undeads, but it is absolutely impossible for both of them to be the same person. That guy was at the peak of rank 6, so how can this rank 1 core evolver be the same person as him?" Baphomet frowned upon hearing Eldrakar and fell deep into thought. "I don't know what kind of person the Shadow Monarch was, but just from the fact that this guy killed hundreds of top-level core evolvers who entered the tomb along with rank 3 monsters, I can say that he might be even more dangerous than him." Baphomet looked at Voidskar, who was listening to their conversation without saying anything, and asked in a deep voice, "Where is he now?" Hearing Baphomet, Voidskar stopped looking at Eldrakar, who was obviously stunned after seeing Evan's image, and replied, "From what I know, he entered the first layer around 1 month ago." First layer. Baphomet raised an eyebrow upon hearing Voidskar, as he did not expect a rank 1 core evolver would dare to enter the first layer, but when he thought about how Evan killed hundreds of top-level core evolvers, the surprise he was feeling quickly disappeared. "Let's go to the first layer and meet him in person," he said to Eldrakar in a serious voice. Eldrakar nodded his head upon hearing Baphomet and didn't refuse, as there were many things he wanted to confirm and he needed to see Evan for that. After making up their minds, both Eldrakar and Baphomet said goodbye to Voidskar and rushed towards the first layer. After taking the high-level recovery potion, it took Evan nearly 1 hour to return to his peak condition. Under the effect of the high-level recovery potion, all of his spiritual power was fully restored and the fatigue he had been feeling also disappeared. Once he was back in perfect condition, he took out the rainbow-colored breaker pill from the pill bottle. "Here goes nothing," Evan said in a low voice and tossed the pill into his mouth. The moment the breaker pill entered his mouth and touched his tongue, it turned into a wave of energy and rushed toward his primordial monarch core. Normally, once someone finished creating their domain, their core would remain in an unstable state for quite some time due to the newly created energy pathways between the core and the energy ring. Because of its unstable state, people need to wait for a long time before they can think about advancing again. But Evan didn't really care about this. The reason: throughout his journey from an F-rank hunter to a rank 1 core evolver, his core never showed signs of instability. Even when he was in Aurora World, other people needed to stabilize their core after advancing to the next level. But his core was different. As long as he provided it with enough energy, he could advance to the next rank without worrying about the instability of his core. The reason he had asked Octavius to create a breaker pill was that he was at least 90% sure that even after creating his domain, his core wouldn't show any signs of instability. Since he was certain his core wouldn't become unstable, he wanted to evolve his domain into a zone and reach rank 2 core evolver before facing the monsters in the central area of the first layer. Domains and zones are not much different from each other. In simple terms, a zone is just an evolved form of a domain. Once a domain evolves into a zone, all the abilities provided by the domain will be greatly strengthened, and the user's control over their conceptual energy will be enhanced. The amount of energy released by the breaker pill was vast. Even though Evan's physical body was powerful, he still felt tingling pain all over when the energy of the pill rushed inside his body. As the energy of the pill rushed toward his core, the spinning speed of his void energy ring and the primordial monarch core suddenly increased. Evan resisted the uncomfortable feeling caused by the large amount of energy rushing into his body and carefully guided the energy of the breaker pill so that it wouldn't destroy the newly created energy pathways between his core and the energy ring. Under Evan's guidance, the energy of the breaker pill entered his primordial monarch core. However, his core didn't absorb this energy. Instead, it sent it toward the void energy ring through the newly created energy pathways. The moment the energy of the breaker pill came into contact with the void energy ring, Evan's domain activated on its own, covering the entire cave in an instant. Octavius had already gone back inside Evan's soul, so he was unaffected by the domain. As the energy of the breaker pill entered the void energy ring, the size of the void energy ring started to increase and it began to shake violently, showing signs of instability. Evan controlled the amount of energy entering the void ring while simultaneously using his spiritual power to stabilize it. Under Evan's precise control, the void energy ring started to absorb the power of the breaker pill. As the void energy ring absorbed the pill's energy, Evan's domain that he had released inside the cave began to become even more powerful. The size of his domain increased rapidly, but since it couldn't expand due to the cave walls, its power was concentrated within the cave. For the next few hours, Evan guided the power of the breaker pill towards his void energy ring. At the same time, he used his spiritual power to keep the void energy stable as it absorbed the energy from the pill and approached its limit. Even though his spiritual power was very high, Evan still started to feel tired after maintaining the stability of the void energy ring for a few hours. However, he could feel that his domain was reaching its limit, and once it did, it would be time for him to evolve it into a zone. Around 1 more hour later, the void energy ring reached its limit and couldn't absorb the energy from the breaker pill anymore. Once Evan noticed his void energy ring couldn't absorb more energy, he stopped guiding the energy of the breaker pill towards it and let his primordial monarch core absorb it instead. As his core absorbed the energy of the pill, it also started to advance and moved towards the limit of the peak of rank 1. 3 hours later, the remaining energy of the breaker pill was absorbed by Evan's primordial monarch core, and it was at the absolute limit of the peak of rank 1. Other than his core, Evan's domain also reached its limit after absorbing the energy of the breaker pill and was ready to evolve into a zone. His domain just needed one push to evolve into a zone, and the moment it evolved, the restrictions on his core would also be shattered, allowing it to evolve into a rank 2 core. Just a slight push and I can advance, Evan said inwardly, and he already had an idea of what he needed to do. His shadow flickered a bit, and a small purple crystal shot out of it. With his eyes still closed, Evan caught the crystal in his hands and poured his world essence into it. As he poured his world essence into it, the purple crystal melted into a dark purple liquid and seeped into Evan's hand. Upon entering his body through his hand, the dark purple liquid moved towards his void energy ring and soon merged with it. The moment the dark purple liquid merged with his void energy ring, Evan felt some information about void energy enters his mind, slightly increasing his understanding of the void energy. As his understanding of void energy increased, the void energy ring connected to his primordial monarch core started to shaken. Bang! With a small booming sound, his domain started to evolve into a zone. Void crystal, low level, an extremely rare crystal formed due to the void energy of the void space. Refining this crystal can instantly increase your understanding of the conceptual energy of void by 1%. When Evan first arrived in Utopia, he had to escape into the void space to save himself from Ashley. While inside the void space, he found a low-level void crystal that could instantly increase his understanding of void energy by 1%. Earlier, after absorbing the entire energy of the breaker pill, Evan felt he just needed a little push to evolve his void domain into a zone. When he refined the void crystal, his understanding of void energy reached 26%, breaking the limit of a domain. The moment his understanding of void energy reached the 26% mark, his void energy ring, which was already at its limit, couldn't hold anymore and started to evolve. Since Evan's domain was connected with his void energy ring, it also started to evolve along with the void energy ring. The light purple energy field of the domain that covered the entire cave began to turn dark purple, and the pressure released by his domain gradually started to increase. From the surroundings, the world essence rushed towards Evan's domain and was absorbed by it. However, after absorbing the world essence, his domain didn't use it to strengthen itself. Instead, it sent it towards his primordial monarch core. His primordial monarch core was already at the absolute limit of rank 1, so when his domain sent a large amount of world essence towards it, it started to show signs of evolution. Evan knew that his core was not very far from reaching rank 2 level, but for some reason, even after absorbing a large amount of world essence sent by his domain, it couldn't take the last step. He felt as if there were some invisible chains holding his core from breaking the limits of rank 1 and advancing to rank 2. Evan's mind worked at rapid speed and he tried to understand what was going on. After a minute of pondering, he looked at the void energy ring connected to his core and saw that it was still evolving. Maybe, I first need to fully evolve my domain into a zone before my core can evolve. Evan thought inwardly, and instead of sending the world essence of the surroundings to his core, he let his domain absorb it. The moment Evan stopped sending the world essence towards his core and let his domain absorb it, the evolution speed of his domain increased even more. The purple color of his void energy ring began to turn dark, and amid the asteroid belt-like energy ring, tiny dots that looked like small stars started to appear. As the tiny star-like dots appeared, the power of his domain started to increase, and at the same time, Evan felt the density of his void energy slowly increasing. He focused his spiritual senses on the tiny star-like dots and noticed they were releasing faint energy ripples. The energy ripples released by the stars merged with his void energy ring, helping it to evolve to the next level. Around 5 hours later, the entire void energy ring surrounding his primordial monarch core was filled with white star-like dots. All the stars inside the void energy ring were releasing faint energy ripples, and the evolution of his domain was nearing its end. The size of his domain had already increased by more than 3 times, and if it wasn't restricted by the cave walls, it would have easily covered an area of around 5 kilometers. 2 hours later, the small void energy ring was filled with stars and looked as if it contained an entire galaxy inside it. Suddenly, all the stars inside the void energy ring shone brightly and the dark purple void energy inside the ring turned into a liquid form. The moment the void energy turned into liquid form, Evan's domain successfully evolved into a zone. At the same time, Evan saw the rune of origin that covered his heart light up, just like the last time when he created his domain. Your origin essence is reacting to your zone. Your zone is evolving under the influence of your origin essence. 2 similar notifications flashed in front of his eyes, but unlike last time, when the rune of origin sent a burst of energy towards his core, this time, the rune of origin did not release any kind of energy. Evan looked at the shining outline of the rune of origin that was gradually dimming with a blank look on his face, and in just a few seconds, the shining rune of origin returned to its dormant state. The evolution of your zone has failed due to a low amount of origin essence. Increase your authority as the holder of origin to amplify the amount of origin essence within your possession. The evolution of your zone will continue once you have a sufficient amount of origin essence. Evan looked at the 3 notifications that flashed in front of his eyes and shook his head. He ignored these notifications and focused back on his diamond-shaped primordial monarch core. Through his zone, he absorbed a large amount of world essence and sent it towards his core once again. This time, when the world essence approached his core, the primordial monarch core reacted strongly and instantly absorbed all the world essence. While absorbing the world essence, the small diamond-shaped core started to beat like a heart, and Evan felt all the restrictions that were stopping his core from evolving slowly breaking apart. In less than a minute, all the restrictions that he was feeling on his core shattered and bang! With a booming sound, his core shone with dark light and a world essence vortex started to form above his head. At the same time, a notification flashed in front of Evan's eyes. Your core is evolving into a beginner-level rank 2 core. Evan's fingernail-sized, diamond-shaped primordial monarch core was beating like a heart and was absorbing the world essence from the surroundings like a black hole. It was a good thing that the barrier that covered the entrance of the cave didn't block the flow of the world essence from the outside, otherwise, Evan was afraid that the evolution of his core might have failed due to the lack of a sufficient amount of world essence. The deep blue-colored vortex spinning above his head worked like a powerful magnet and continued to pull a large amount of world essence from outside of the cave. Evan's core was at the absolute limit of rank 1, but it didn't mean just a small amount of world essence was enough to evolve it into a rank 2 core. Even though it was at the absolute limit of rank 1, it still needed a large amount of world essence to complete its evolution. Normally, because of the large amount of world essence that his core needed to complete its evolution, the vortex that would have formed to attract the world essence would have definitely exceeded the diameter of a few kilometers. But due to the special nature of the cave, the vortex wasn't able to reach its true size, and as a result, it wasn't able to pull a sufficient amount of world essence, and the time Evan's core needed to complete its evolution increased greatly. Generally, it wouldn't have taken his core more than half an hour to complete its evolution, but due to the low quantity of the world essence, even after 10 hours, Evan's core did not finish its evolution. Although the time his core needed to complete its evolution increased greatly due to the small size of the vortex, there was no other problem, and this slow process wasn't affecting his core. Due to the smooth process, Evan could even use his spiritual senses to monitor other things. Just half an hour left before the effect of time watch ends, he said inwardly while looking at the time watch. With the ratio of 120, it would be 10 hours inside the time field. I hope the evolution of my core will finish in these 10 hours, as I don't want to waste too much time here. Time continued to pass, and just when there were 5 minutes left before the effect of the time watch ended, Evan noticed the world essence vortex above his head started to dissipate. At the same time, the spinning speed of his core increased greatly. Finally, Evan sighed in relief when he saw this, and a small smile appeared on his face as he knew the evolution of his core was about to finish. Around 2 minutes later, the vortex spinning above him completely disappeared. The moment the vortex disappeared, the rotation speed of his primordial monarch core increased even more. At the same time, the small white stars that filled his void energy ring lit up. Boom! A small booming sound echoed out from Evan's body, and the rapidly spinning primordial monarch core released a large amount of energy to nourish his body. But unlike the previous evolutions of his core where the energy released by his core would directly spread throughout his body, this time, the energy released by the core was instantly absorbed by the small shining stars inside the void energy ring. As the small stars absorbed the energy released by the primordial monarch core, their size started to increase. Although the size of Evan's void energy ring was just a little bigger than his fingernail-sized core, it didn't mean the stars inside it were also small. If someone looked at his void energy ring using their spiritual senses, they would see an entire galaxy inside his small void energy ring, filled with thousands of stars. As the size of stars inside his ring increased, Evan felt his zone becoming more powerful. At the same time, looking at the shining stars, he got a few hints about how to evolve his zone into an illusionary world. It seems it won't be easy to evolve my void zone into an illusionary world, Evan said to himself while looking at the shining stars inside his void energy ring. Around 2 minutes later, Evan's primordial monarch core stopped releasing energy and the stars inside the energy ring stopped expanding. When his core stopped releasing energy, Evan was a little confused because although he felt stronger than before, his stat points were still the same. Other than increasing the power of his zone by expanding the size of stars inside the void energy ring, the energy released by his primordial monarch core didn't seem to do anything else. Did I do something wrong during the evolution process? Seeing the energy released by his core just increased the power of his zone a bit, Evan thought with a frown on his face. Just when Evan was thinking he might have done something wrong during the evolution process, the shining stars inside the void energy ring released a burst of energy. The energy released by the stars spread throughout Evan's body in an instant and started to strengthen every single cell of his body. The energy released by stars seeped inside his internal organs, bones, and blood, greatly enhancing his physical abilities. The world essence inside his body condensed and became denser than before. The amount of primordial shadow energy inside his core started to increase, and at the same time, he felt his other attributes, including world essence, strength, agility, etc., break free from the limit of rank 1 and begin to increase. The energy released by the stars continued to nourish Evan's body for the next few minutes. Around 10 minutes later, the glow around the stars inside the void energy ring began to recede, and in less than a minute, all the stars returned to their previous normal state. As the stars inside the void energy ring returned to the normal stat, a notification flashed in front of Evan's eyes. Your primordial monarch core successfully evolved into a rank 2 core. Your primordial monarch core successfully evolved into a rank 2 core. Evan slowly opened his eyes and took a deep breath. He raised his hand in front of his face and clenched his fist. The moment he clenched his fist, the air and space around it warped and twisted, demonstrating his greatly increased strength. Seeing the effect of his simple gesture, Evan's lips arched upwards and he tried his best not to laugh like a madman. You have received class-specific skill, Shadow Forge. You have received skill, Shadow Puppeteer. You have received authority, Shadow Guardian. Suddenly, 3 more notifications flashed in front of his eyes, informing him about his new skills and authority. Just as Evan was about to examine them, he suddenly felt something and used his spiritual senses to look at his body. Upon looking at his body using his spiritual senses, he noticed many black-colored, strange-looking glyphs glowing on his bones. Realm glyphs. Evan raised an eyebrow upon seeing the glyphs and wondered what was happening. He wasn't surprised to see the glyphs on his bones as he had been aware of them for a long time. These glyphs had appeared on his bones when he was in Aurora World, and even now, he did not know much about them. Chap. 584. All the glyphs engraved on his bones were separated from each other, but right now, as Evan looked at them, he saw all the glyphs were expanding and interlocking with each other. In just a few seconds, most of the glyphs that were engraved on the same bone were connected to each other and looked more mysterious than before. Your realm glyphs have advanced to the second stage. Your connection with the primordial shadow realm has been strengthened. The amount of primordial shadow energy within your possession increased by 10%. Due to your strengthened connection with the primordial shadow realm, your authority as the holder of origin is further solidified. Under the effect of the realm glyphs, your authority, Shadow Guardian, has evolved into Realm Guardian. Evan looked at the notifications that flashed in front of his eyes and was taken aback. He read all the notifications carefully and was confused because there were many things he didn't understand. Although he was confused, Evan wasn't surprised because he was already used to seeing these kinds of notifications. In simple words, these realm glyphs are related to the primordial shadow realm and I can strengthen my connection with it by advancing the level of glyphs. Evan said to himself and nodded his head with a plain look on his face. Not only that, by strengthening my connection with the shadow realm, I can even increase the amount of primordial shadow energy within my possession along with my authority as the holder of origin. The thing that delighted Evan most was the fact that he could strengthen his authority as the holder of origin by increasing the level of realm glyphs. By increasing his authority as the holder of origin, he could increase the amount of origin essence within his possession. He really wanted to see what kind of evolution his zone would undergo once he had a sufficient amount of origin essence within his possession. After reading the notifications, Evan looked at the information about the new skills and the authority he had just received. Shadow Forge. Using this skill, you can transform your shadow into solid objects, such as weapons, armor, or tools. The power of the object created by using your shadow depends on the level of your core. Evan read the details of the Shadow Forge skill and was mildly surprised as it was the first time he had received a skill like this. Transform my shadow into solid objects, he said in a low voice and looked at his shadow. The world essence inside his body moved, and he activated the Shadow Forge skill. The moment he activated the skill, Evan's shadow flickered and moved like water. He thought about a sharp spear and in less than a second, his shadow transformed into a 2-meter spear. The body of the spear was black in color, looking like solid metal, while the sharp blade in front shone like a black crystal. Evan picked up the spear and saw its frame was even tougher than normal rank 2 materials. After checking the spear for a few seconds, he noticed his world essence was slowly depleting. So, I need to continue to expend my world essence in order to keep my shadow in a solid form. Evan said as he looked at his world essence, which was slowly decreasing due to the black spear in his hands. Suddenly, Evan thought about something and his eyes lit up. Since this thing is made of my shadow, then doesn't it mean? He said to himself, his eyes glowing with excitement. I will try out my conjecture after leaving the cave, Evan muttered, and after doing a few more experiments with his shadow, he stopped using the Shadow Forge skill. The moment he stopped using the skill, a black-colored chair in front of him melted into a black liquid and turned back into his shadow. After experimenting with Shadow Forge, Evan looked at the Shadow Puppeteer skill. Shadow Puppeteer. Using this skill, you can control the people through their shadows, effectively manipulating their movements and actions as if they were puppets. The effectiveness of the skill depends on the target's rank. The higher the rank of your opponent, the higher the chances of skill failure. Evan wasn't surprised after reading the details of the Shadow Puppeteer skill because, just from its name, he had already guessed what kind of skill it was. Controlling people like puppets, Evan said with an evil smile on his face and immediately thought about many ways to utilize this skill. This skill came at the right time. With this, it won't be difficult to handle the large groups of monsters when I move towards the Pillar of Light, Evan said to himself, thinking about the chaos he could cause among the group of monsters using this skill. There was no one in the cave other than him and Alora, so Evan couldn't test the Shadow Puppeteer skill. But he didn't think too much about it because he knew he would be able to test it soon. After confirming the details of the Shadow Puppeteer skill, Evan's eyes fell on the authority that he received. An authority that evolved due to the realm glyphs, he said in a low voice and looked at its details. An authority that evolved due to the realm glyphs, Evan said with gleaming eyes and looked at the details of the Realm Guardian authority. Realm Guardian authority. Upon activation, you can randomly summon one of the guardians of the primordial shadow realm for 5 minutes. This authority can be used once every 6 months. Summon one of the guardians of the primordial shadow realm. Evan raised an eyebrow upon reading the simple details of the authority and wondered what kind of person this guardian was. From the long cooldown time of this authority, I think the person I can summon must be at least rank 3 or rank 4. Evan said with a thoughtful look on his face. The cooldown time for his Master of Shadow authority is 1 month, while the cooldown time for the Death Guardian authority is 7 days. Both of these authorities are very powerful, but even then, compared to the cooldown time of the Realm Guardian authority, their cooldown times are very short. As far as Evan knew, the stronger the skill or authority, the longer its cooldown time would be. Since the cooldown time of the Realm Guardian is 6 months, he estimated that the person he could summon using this authority must be at least a rank 3 or rank 4 core evolver. I can use it if I encounter something unexpected in the central area of the first layer. Evan said in a low voice and stopped looking at the information of the Realm Guardian authority. Name: Evan. Race: Eldar. Current synchronization rate between your race Eldar and the origin universe, 60%. Rank: Beginner level rank 2. Bloodline: Doombringer partially awakened, 2nd stage. Strength: 923. Agility: 876. Endurance: 935 plus 935. Effective ruler's authority. World essence: 921. Stamina: 898. Intelligence: 910 plus 91. Effective false progenitor title. Primordial shadow energy: 988. Current understanding of the conceptual energy of void, 26.00%. Bound flame: prismatic fire. Skills: shadow walk, shadow storage, dimensional shadow bullet, ice chains, wind manipulation, mind suppression, shadow shrouding wings, temporal velocity, energy devouring, thunder tempest, flicker step, ember vitality, regeneration, mid-level poison resistance, death ring, ice spear, wind walk, summon lich, soul beacon, soul severance, fireball, blinding light, lightning arrow, gaze of monarch, psychic soul realm, shadow mark, abyssal vortex, sky fall, shadow puppeteer. Physique: shadow monarch physique. Title: rule breaker, creator of the primordial shadow realm, the cursed one, owner of the Eldoria city, false progenitor. Class: shadow necromancer. Class skills: shadow resurrection, shadow save, shadow senses, shadow possession, shadow nails, death transfer, growth link, soul absorption, soul fusion, shadow clone, shadow world, shadow forge. Racial skill: Reaper's Wrath. Authorities: Master of Shadows, Death Guardian, Realm Guardian. Ruler's authority. Evan looked at his stat points and a big grin appeared on his face. Originally, all of his stat points had increased by 5 times when he became a rank 2 core evolver, bringing all of his stats, which were at 150, to 750 points. However, these stat points increased even more because of the effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill. When Evan killed hundreds of core evolvers during the incident, he was using the Soul Harvest mode of the Reaper's Wrath skill. Under the effect of Soul Harvest mode, he absorbed many souls and received stat points from them. But at that time, due to the limit of his rank 1 core, his stats didn't go past 150 points. Although his stat points did not go beyond 150 points, it didn't mean the stat points he had received under Soul Harvest mode of Reaper's Wrath skill disappeared. All the stat points he received originated from the souls he absorbed under the effect of the Soul Harvest mode. When he wasn't able to absorb the stat points of these souls because of the limit of his core, the energy of these souls was stored under the control of the soul absorption skill. The moment Evan reached rank 2, this energy was released, and his stat points, which were 750, increased even more. With my current power level, if I use everything I have, I should be able to face a mid-level or even a peak-level rank 3 monster for some time. Evan thought inwardly and closed the status window. After closing the status window, He looked at the time watch in his hands and saw its effect had already ended a few minutes ago. Good thing I evolved the broken time watch, otherwise I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to become a rank 2 core evolver before the tomb closed. Evan stored the time watch inside his shadow storage and looked at Elora, only to see her sleeping on the bed like a log. Seeing she was still sleeping, he shook his head and stood up. He stretched his body, and his bones made some cracking sounds as he had been sitting in the same place for nearly 4 days. Damn, I can't understand how some people can sit in the same place for months without moving, Evan said while stretching his body, thinking about high-level core evolvers who usually spend months or even years sitting in the same place without moving. He walked towards the entrance of the cave and tried to look at its surroundings. Because of the special materials from which the cave was made, his spiritual senses couldn't go outside, so he had no choice but to use his eyes to look around. Looks like there are no monsters around the cave, Evan said after looking around for a bit and then came back inside the cave. After coming inside, he rested for a few hours and once he was back in his top condition, he immediately left the cave along with Elora, heading towards the pillar of half-golden and half-black light. While Evan was moving towards the pillar of light, unknown to him, 2 rank 6 core evolvers had also entered the first layer and were moving towards him. According to what Elora had told Evan, the groups of monsters attack the pillar of light every few months in order to get inside it. Only during the time of the monster attack does she stay near the pillar of light, otherwise, she spends most of her time in her cave abode, sleeping. After learning that Elora usually stays in her cave and goes to the pillar of light only during the monster tide, Evan thought she might know a safe route that allows her to travel between her cave abode and the pillar of light. After all, just looking at the hundreds of groups of monsters in the center area of the first layer, Evan was sure that without a hidden or safe route, it would be impossible for her to go back and forth between her cave abode and the pillar of light without encountering the monsters. But when he talked to her about this matter, Elora suddenly disappeared and came back after a few seconds. After returning, she explained to him that she didn't need any safe or hidden route because she could directly teleport outside of the pillar of light. Evan was stunned when she told him she could directly go to the pillar of light and asked if she could take him with her. Unfortunately, she told him she couldn't take anyone with her. Knowing that Elora couldn't teleport him right outside the pillar of light, nor did she know a safe route to approach the pillar, Evan had no choice but to move forward on his own while trying his best to avoid the groups of monsters. However, with hundreds of groups of monsters in the central area of the first layer, it was impossible for him to avoid the monsters forever. About an hour after leaving the cave, he finally encountered a group of monsters that he couldn't avoid and had to fight against. 36 rank 1, 27 rank 2, and 1 mid-level rank 3, Evan muttered in a low voice, looking at the group of monsters while hiding his presence. Evan was currently in an area that looked like a desert. There was fine sand everywhere around him, and the chilling night breeze, filled with sharp sand particles, was flowing without stopping. In the middle of the desert, he was hiding behind a small sand dune and was thinking about the best way to deal with the monsters. I have already turned all the peak rank 2 monsters I had collected into shadow undeads, so it wouldn't be difficult to clean this group of monsters, but the chaos caused by the fight would definitely attract the attention of the other groups of monsters. If possible, Evan wanted to avoid the fight because he just had a few days left before the tomb closed. He was still quite far away from the pillar of light and he didn't want to waste his time fighting against these monsters. I can use Shadow World to hide the energy fluctuations released by the fight, he said after a minute of consideration. Although it's a waste to use my primordial shadow energy here, it shouldn't be a problem as long as I end the fight in less than 3 minutes. Evan couldn't activate the Shadow World skill using the World Essence. Only by using the primordial shadow energy could he activate it. If possible, he wanted to avoid wasting his primordial shadow energy because the recovery speed of primordial shadow energy is very slow compared to World Essence, and there isn't even a potion that can help him speed up the recovery of shadow energy. He had planned to use the Shadow World only during emergencies to save his primordial shadow energy, but in his current situation, if he wanted to avoid attracting the attention of other monsters, he had no choice but to use it to isolate the energy fluctuations of the fight. Once Evan decided to use the Shadow World to isolate the energy fluctuations, he did not wait long and started to prepare other things that he needed to end the fight in just a few minutes. Shadow Clone. He used his Shadow Clone skill and created a clone of himself. Shadow Clone. Using the essence of shadow, you can create a clone of yourself. The clone will have 50% of your power and it will be able to use all of your skills except for class-specific, unique, and racial skills. After creating his clone, Evan immediately activated the Shadow World skill. The moment he used the Shadow World skill, a black shadow stretched from his feet and instantly covered a large patch of desert. The monsters not far away from Evan were stunned upon seeing a black shadow covering the ground beneath their feet and looked at it with dumbfounded expressions on their faces. Before the monsters could understand what was happening, the shadow that covered the sandy ground rose towards the sky and engulfed all of them inside a black dome. Roar, roar, roar. Seeing someone trap them inside a dome, all the monsters, including the mid-level rank 3-1, who was a 20-meter-long, deep yellow-colored sand lizard, started to roar while looking around warily. Hidden within the walls of Shadow World, Evan and his clone looked at the group of monsters with narrowed eyes and activated the Shadow Puppeteer skill simultaneously. The moment Evan and his clone activated the skill, all the rank 1 and most of the rank 2 monsters stopped roaring. One of the peak rank 2 monster, which looked like a lion, was still roaring while looking at the black-colored dome when suddenly, swish, a mid-level rank 2 tiger who was standing beside it suddenly attacked, slashing at its eyes. The peak rank 2 lion never thought its own gang member would attack it, so it wasn't able to react in time and one of its eyes was destroyed by the mid-level rank 2 tiger. Roar. The peak rank 2 lion roared in pain and dropped to the ground as blood flowed out from its destroyed eye without stopping. Roar, roar, roar. Similar scenes happened everywhere within the Shadow World and all the monsters started to attack each other. The mid-level rank 3 sand lizard was stunned when it saw this and couldn't understand why its gang members were fighting each other. Seeing the black dome that trapped them, the lizard knew there was someone targeting them, and in order to stop the attacker, the first thing that came into its mind was to bring its gang members back to their senses. Roar. A domineering roar escaped the lizard's mouth, and the heavy aura of the mid-level rank 3 monster pressed down on all the monsters who were fighting against each other. Feeling the lizard's aura, all the monsters who were fighting each other stiffened and couldn't move their bodies. Roar. After stopping the monsters, the lizard roared once more and all the monsters quickly gathered around it. The moment all the monsters gathered around the sand lizard, Evan's lips curled upwards and a cold smile appeared on his face. "That's what I was waiting for," he muttered in a low voice, and by using the power of Shadow World, instantly appeared above the group of monsters. After appearing above the monsters, he stretched out his hand downwards in the direction of the monsters and opened his mouth. Abyssal Vortex. The moment Evan spoke, a pitch-black vortex flashing with different colors of light opened in front of him. Abyssal Vortex unique skill. Upon activation, conjures a swirling vortex of darkness using the primordial shadow energy that absorbs and nullifies incoming attacks. The user can store the nullified attacks inside the Abyssal Vortex and use them to attack their enemies. Tens of attacks, each comparable to the full power attack of a peak rank 2 core revolver, shot out from it, heading straight towards the group of monsters that had gathered together. When Evan appeared above the monster group and opened the Abyssal Vortex, the mid-level rank 3 sand lizard immediately noticed him. Seeing tens of powerful attacks coming towards it and its group, the sand lizard's face changed and its eyes glowed with a deep yellow light. The sand around the lizard started to move and rose above the group of monsters, forming a sand wall. Seeing the sand wall, Evan just smirked and glanced towards his shadow clone. Suddenly, some of the monsters who had gathered around the sand lizard moved and attacked it simultaneously. The lizard was completely focused on the sand wall, so when its gang members attacked it, it wasn't able to react in time and was struck by their attacks. Due to its high defense, the sand lizard was not heavily injured by the attacks of the monsters, but these attacks successfully interrupted its skill and the sand wall it created crumbled. The moment the sand wall crumbled, boom, the tens of attacks released by the Abyssal Vortex struck the monsters. The entire Shadow World was lit up by different colors of lights and powerful energy waves spread outwards in all directions, shaking the entire Shadow World. Evan used his control over the Shadow World to stop the energy waves from spreading so that they wouldn't alert the other monsters in the area. The attacks that Evan released through the Abyssal Vortex were the attacks of more than 10 peak rank 2 Shadow Undeads, so after being struck by all of them at the same time, there was no way ordinary monsters could survive. Using his control over the Shadow World, Evan quickly checked the situation and noticed that other than him, there was only one life aura left inside the Shadow World. The endurance of a mid-level rank 3 monster is truly out of this world. Evan muttered in a low voice as he looked at the sand lizard who was slowly sinking inside the sandy ground, probably thinking about running away using one of its skills. Seeing the sand lizard trying to escape, Evan used the Shadow Forge skill. His shadow moved and a black-colored spear appeared in his hand. Let's see if my guess about the Shadow Forge skill is right or not. Evan said, and the black spear was engulfed by the purple fire of the prismatic fire, increasing its sharpness and durability. Evan held the black spear covered in fire in his hand and threw it towards the sand lizard, who was slowly sinking inside the sandy ground. Due to its injuries, the sand lizard wasn't able to avoid the spear and the shadow spear struck it right on its back. After being struck by the spear, the 20-meter-long lizard did not react and continued to sink into the ground as if it didn't care about such a small injury. But just when the lizard's entire body was about to disappear into the ground. Roar! The lizard suddenly roared in pain and jumped out, rolling on the ground in agony. Because of Evan's sudden attack, the 20-meter-long sand lizard was heavily injured. It might have successfully defended itself, but the sudden intervention of the monsters controlled by Evan's clone made it impossible for the lizard to stop the abyssal vortex, which was filled with the attacks of tens of rank 2 shadow undeads. The deep yellow skin of the sand lizard was charred black and its eyes were a little dizzy. But if one looked closely, they would see that even though the lizard was injured, its life force was as strong as ever and it was far from dying. Just 1 second after the attack, the sand lizard came back to its senses and wanted to escape underground using its sand escape skill to recover. However, the moment the thought of escaping underground came to its mind, a black, sharp spear covered in a deep purple flame tore through the space and struck it right on its back. Although the sand lizard's skin was burnt due to the tens of attacks released by the abyssal vortex, its defense was still very high, so the spear only penetrated 15 centimeters into its skin. The lizard's whole body was 20 meters long, so when the spear made by the Shadow Forge skill struck it, it just felt like someone had struck its back with a toothpick and did not pay much attention to it. With its current endurance, the sand lizard did not care about such a small injury and activated the sand escape skill, slowly submerging its body underground. But just before the whole body of the lizard submerged into the sand, it suddenly felt something and a painful roar escaped its mouth. Roar! The sand lizard suddenly jumped out of the sand and started coughing up blood. Seeing this, Evan's lips arched upwards into a big smile. Looks like my guess was correct, he said in a delighted voice, looking at the place where his spear created by the Shadow Forge skill had struck the lizard. At this moment, the tip of the black spear that had penetrated the skin of the sand lizard was glowing slightly and there was a small fist-sized portal in front of it. From the portal, a black hand glowing with blood-red light was coming out and the blood flow inside the lizard's body was in complete disarray. Its blood was flowing at the speed of a bullet train, destroying its blood vessels and damaging its internal organs. The spear is made using my shadow, and my shadow is connected with the shadow storage, Evan said with a smile on his face. At first, I was doubtful whether I would be able to open the shadow storage after turning my shadow into a solid object, but now it is obvious that I can use the shadow storage even after turning my shadow into a solid object. Through the portal opened by the shadow storage inside the lizard's body, Zorda used his unique skill, Blood Rampage. Normally, it would have been very difficult for Zorda to affect the mid-level rank 3 sand lizard using his skill, but because of the portal opened by the shadow storage, his hand made direct contact with the lizard's blood, greatly increasing the power of his skill. The sand lizard was rolling on the sandy ground in pain, with blood flowing out from its eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. Just by looking at it, anyone could tell that it was in great pain. But due to its high endurance, even though its blood vessels burst apart, it was still far from death. Let's end this. Seeing the sand lizard was rolling in pain, Evan muttered in a low voice as he wasn't a fan of torturing someone for no reason. The storage ring he was wearing flashed, and a silver-colored sword, releasing the aura of a peak rank 2 artifact appeared in his hands. The name of the sword was Moon's Edge, and he found it in one of the storage rings he collected after the incident. The storage ring that Evan was wearing was actually filled with many different kinds of artifacts and there was no shortage of rank 2 weapons among them. After taking out Moon's Edge, Evan used temporal velocity to increase his agility by 30% and, at the same time, covered the sword using the red fire of the prismatic fire. After covering the sword in red fire, he flapped his shadow wings and in an instant, arrived above the sand lizard's head. The sand lizard was rolling on the ground at rapid speed, but because of the effect of temporal velocity, in Evan's eyes, the lizard was rolling at the speed of a turtle. Before the sand lizard could even register his presence above its head, Evan lifted the silver-colored sword clad in red fire and plunged it inside the lizard's head. Roar! A fountain of red blood spurted out and the lizard roared in pain as the moon's edge sword plunged deep inside its head. Although the sword penetrated deep inside its head, it was still far from reaching its brain. The sand lizard wanted to throw away Evan by rolling away, but before it could, the silver-colored sword in Evan's hand lit up. Moonlight, he said in a low voice and activated the skill of the moon's edge sword. Swish! The moment he activated the sword's skill, from the edge of the sword, which was plunged deep inside the lizard's head, a sharp silver-colored sword light, covered in destructive red fire shot out and penetrated its brain in an instant. The moment the sword light pierced its brain, the sand lizard, which was trying to throw off Evan, stopped and its life force slowly faded away. Thud! With a thudding sound, the giant body of the sand lizard dropped to the sand ground, with blood flowing out from the top of its head. Evan looked at the lifeless body of the sand lizard and his lips curled up. He stopped using the Shadow Forge skill, and the black-colored spear plunged into the lizard's back, turned back into his shadow. Last time, it took me nearly 3 days to kill that mid-level rank 3 monster, but this time, I killed a mid-level rank 3 monster in less than 3 minutes, Evan said in a low voice, thinking about the scorpion he faced when he went to the location of the time liquid. Evan pulled out the moon's edge sword from the lizard's head and wiped the blood from its blade. After cleaning the sword, he put it into the storage ring and jumped down from the top of the lizard's body. The moment he jumped down, a black shadow engulfed the entire body of the sand lizard and it sank down inside his shadow storage. After putting away the body of the sand lizard, Evan looked at the bodies of the other monsters and activated the Shadow Resurrection skill. Under the effect of the Shadow Resurrection skill, all the monsters, other than the rank 1, turned into Shadow Undeads. The reason the rank 1 monsters didn't turn into Shadow Undeads was that their bodies were blasted into smithereens by the powerful attacks released by the Abyssal Vortex and it was impossible for Evan to turn them. After turning the monsters into Shadow Undeads, Evan stopped using the Shadow World and the black dome that covered him disappeared. Once the black dome vanished, Evan took Alora with him and once again moved towards the Pillar of Light. While Evan was making his way towards the Pillar of Light, Eldar and Bamet, who were faster than him, had already reached the center area of the first layer and stopped some distance away from the Pillar of Light.